time together. It has been such a gift to be connected to Caitlin over the years, and I'm just such a huge fan of the Catholic Mobilizing Network's work. And so it's a treat to meet you all, and just looking forward to this time and to hopefully ongoing connections with you all as well. I'll say before I kind of give a brief introduction of who I am and what brings me to this place, maybe in addition to games and activities in the restorative justice field, one of my other great loves and passions is the theological roots of this work, and particularly looking at restorative justice through the lens of ritual theory. And so that's not the topic today, but maybe we'll have other conversations about that at some point, because it's a great love and interest of mine, looking at that kind of spiritual aspect of restorative justice and how the ritual of these processes bring us into a really unique form of space together, and the magic that unfolds through that. So I'm Lindsey Pointer, she, her pronouns. I was lucky enough to learn about restorative justice while I was still in undergrad, and did training as a facilitator. And then, as Kathleen mentioned, my first real job in the restorative justice space was with Kathleen as my boss. So you can imagine what a great experience that was. It was wonderful at Longmont Community Justice Partnership in Colorado. I left that role because I received a Fulbright to study restorative justice in New Zealand. And I ended up staying past that award period to do a PhD program at Victoria University in Wellington. And the topic of my dissertation was Understanding Restorative Justice as a Ritual. And that's now a book called The Restorative Justice Ritual. I loved it, loved every part of it. Considered staying in New Zealand long-term, honestly. But my daughter was about to be born, and we wanted to be closer to family, so decided to move back to the States. And I now work for Vermont Law and Graduate School. I'm on the faculty there. We also are the host institution of a couple grants from the Bureau of Justice Assistance to start a National Center on Restorative Justice that's focused on restorative justice education and research. So that's most of my work, in addition to the great games and activities work that I get to do with Kathleen. So looking forward to having this time together. We'll go ahead and jump in so that we have plenty of time for all the activities we want to go through together today. The first one, so I know we've been introducing ourselves in the chat, so getting to see kind of who everyone is, where everyone's tuning in from today. We wanted to ask a couple more kind of relationship building questions in the chat to just have a sense of who's here and give us a way to connect. We knew if we did a connection circle with all 36 of us, it might take up the whole hour and a half. And so just finding a way to still hear from everyone, but allow us to fit as much as we can into this time. These questions come from an in-person game that we like to play called SIA. So we'll provide the instructions for that game. It's a great relationship building game for in-person teaching and training of restorative justice, in particular because it can be done with any size. So whereas with a circle process, you might be limited to, say, 20 people or less, SIA can be played with 10 people, and it can be played with, Kathleen, what would you say the largest number we've played with? Like 80, maybe?
Almost 200 that time in Colorado Springs.
At a conference, true. We had a conference one time where we were like up on a stage and there was like 200 people playing SIA. And it worked great. You just have to have a bell to get everyone's attention. So these questions come from that activity, and it's pretty easy to follow how to play it in person from the instructions we'll send out. So get your chat ready. First question's an easy one. How many siblings you have? So just typing a number in the chat. How many siblings do you have? I'm seeing lots of range. Thank you. I'll say I have 3 brothers. I'm seeing a lot of us with 3, 4. Great. All right. So just to give a little context, when we're playing in person, participants are clustered in groups of 4, and the person with the most siblings would then win this round and would be asked to say SIA to their group and move to the next group in a clockwise direction. So great. Oh, I see 11. That might have been our high, but they were coming in so quickly, I lost track. All right, we're going to come to the next question. Oh, and I'm seeing a question around games being played via Zoom, which we have a few that are specific for Zoom that we'll be doing today as well. So next question, what's the most interesting form of transportation you've used? What's the most interesting form of transportation you've used? Oh, and thank you. Kathleen saw Mary, who had 13 siblings. It's amazing. An elephant. Awesome. Sailboat, rollerblade, a cart drawn by goats. These are all really fun and interesting. Aircraft carrier, a donkey, horse and buggy, pineapple full float, thank you. A motorcycle, back of a pickup in Guatemala, a horse, a train. No, I'm not seeing all of these as they come in. These are wonderful. So you can imagine in person, this turns into kind of a fun conversation about the when and where and why of these different forms of transportation until you select one person to then say see ya from the group. Canoe, a hillside tram. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question for us in the chat to keep this just kind of having a sense of each other. Final question. What is the most unusual job you've had? What is the most unusual job that you've had? Let's see. Photographing singing messages. I need more description of that one. I love that. Making Easter baskets in a factory. Toe checker at a swimming pool. X-ray flyer in a doctor's office. Children's museum where I had to handle a snake. That's great. Garbage collector. Awesome. Well, we see more of these coming in. And yes, so I see Amber's asked a clarifying question. So yes, the groups of 4 would then decide, who's the most interesting or what's the most unusual job, which is kind of just fun and playful, right? It's not around an actual winner, but just a fun, playful way to then decide one person who's moving on to the next group so that you're having a new group for each question that's being asked. Awesome. Well, I'll leave it to you to continue reading some of these responses that are coming in because they're very fun, very interesting. I'm sure each of these has a great story behind them. But thanks for taking this time to just share a little bit more about yourselves. So I'll pass it over to Kathleen for our next activity.
Thanks, Lindsey. Yeah, so just to reiterate, we will be sending you instructions for how to play Sia in person. Sia, this game, the way that we play it in person is hard to translate to Zoom, which is one of the reasons that we developed the next activity that you will get to experience right now, because it's an easier online activity. And you'll also receive the instructions for this one. So this one we call This or That with a restorative twist. So it builds off of an activity or game that you may be familiar with, where I'm going to name 2 things and you're going to choose which one you prefer between those 2 things. So warm-up example would be, and I'll provide gestures for each one. So do you prefer hamburgers, peace sign, or tacos, goggles? So let's try it now. Do you prefer, and we'll do it all at the same time. So you do the gesture that matches what you prefer. And you can also see what everybody else is voting for. So let's see who loves burgers and who loves tacos. Well, a lot of tacos. Oh, maybe even Steven. Burger and taco crowd. Okay, great. Everyone's got it. Who prefers cats or dogs? Cats or dogs? Oh, a lot of dog people I'm seeing. Yeah. Okay. Some abstainers, neither one maybe. Controversial question here. Very, very high intensity. Do you prefer to text or pick up the phone and call? Texters, phone calls. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of texters. Some phone calls out there. Great. Wonderful. Okay, and finally, let's do, depends on the person. I saw someone totally make sense to me. What is most important to you? Money or fame? If you could choose one or the other, money or fame? Money. I'm seeing some money. Yeah. Fame it looks kind of stressful to me. I don't know if that seems like the case for you all. We're going to shift to the next round, the next level of questions that have more to do with communication. So we're trying to tie in people's preferences to restorative practices. So first one, when you're in conflict, do you prefer to run away and hide or address it head on? Run away and hide or address it head on? Okay, addressing it head on. We've got some courageous folks. Oh, I see one of these. Yeah, it could be, maybe it depends, Amber, right? Like who it is, what's going on. Totally relate to that. How about apologizing to someone? Do you find apologizing super difficult or not a problem? Let's see what people are saying. Okay, a little bit of both. I'm seeing, yeah, some enthusiastic responses for each one. Yeah, fight or flight also comes up, I'm seeing in the chat. If you've been confronted by somebody, are you more likely to yell or cry? If you've been confronted, are you going to yell or cry? I'm kind of a crier. Yeah, so we've got some of each. We've got some criers in here. Yeah, depends probably which one. Okay, last one in this round is taking responsibility. Might you be more likely, like if you have to take responsibility for one of your actions, will you be proactive, own up to it proactively, or will you wait till you've been caught? This is a big reveal. Yeah, okay, proactive. Some very proactive restorative people here. And then if you see a few folks who, yeah, just take my time with that. All right, a couple more questions that advance to the third level, which we like to call the nature of the universe. What do you think is more powerful, fate or free will? Fate or free will, which one do you think? Seeing some early free will folks. That makes sense. The free will folks responded right away. They're like, yeah, free will is where it's at. Do you think that trust can be repaired? Can trust be repaired? Yes, trust can be repaired for sure. Nope, not possible. Can trust be repaired? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Takes time, I see in the chat for sure. That's true for me as well. How about this one? Thinking about human beings, do you think we are inherently flawed or inherently good? Are people inherently flawed or inherently good? Seeing a lot of goods. Yeah, that's when you know it's a restorative crowd. There's a lot of tapping into the inherent good for sure. Okay, I'm gonna ask just two more. Can true forgiveness happen? True forgiveness, is it possible or not possible? True forgiveness. Okay, I'm seeing a little bit of both. Yeah, possible, impossible. Yeah, right. Más o menos, seeing in the chat, right on. Yeah, right. And forgiveness is something that we see, just like accountability takes time, happens in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms. Okay, and let's see, last question. Why we are who we are. Is it nature or nurture? Nature or nurture? Oh, I'm seeing, who's this? Mary with the double, little of each. Yeah, Janet also. Okay, a bunch of people saying a little bit of each, definitely. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for participating in that and moving through that so quickly. I'd love to have a few people just respond in the chat. What surprised you about watching the group respond to these prompts? Did anything surprise you? You can put a few words in the chat. Quick responses. Yeah. In this activity, we really want it to move quickly so people can, respond fast without thinking too much. Yeah, the options go beyond two. Totally agree. hard to respond so fast. Yeah, there's some pressure, right? There's some out of the box thinkers, totally. Most have a mixed response. Yeah, I noticed that as well. It's definitely not always one or the other. It may change with reflection. Beautiful. No surprise. Yeah. Yeah, great. So you can imagine a difference in trust and forgiveness responses. And these could be the beginning of okay, great. Thanks for saying that, Betsy. That's where I'd love to lead from. It's just, this is an activity that really can be kind of like a quick energizer for any group, and especially a group that you already have relationships and community with. It can bring people into kind of a fun, playful connection, but also plant the seeds for bigger conversations. And it really surfaces that even if we have shared backgrounds or a shared faith, we may have really different ways of seeing the world. And we know that in restorative justice and restorative practices, there's space for allowing and inviting and including different perspectives, different beliefs. And so we would encourage facilitators to take in what they see in the responses from their groups from playing this game, and then build from that as you want to try to explore different ways for your learners to experience restorative justice or become facilitators, and recognize that there's in restorative justice, what we used to say, Lindsey and I at our organization, that there isn't one truth with a capital T, that there's so many different ways of seeing and understanding an incident of harm. And so we're in constant practice and reflection for how we can manage understanding that and hold multiple perspectives. Thank you so much, Lindsey. I'll pass to you for our next section.
Great. And thanks for playing along. I know that that activity often leaves people with a feeling of like, well, wait, we need to dive way into a conversation about trust and forgiveness now. We've just scraped the surface, which is, yes, exactly what it is well used for, is then a launching point into a circle, you know. So maybe if you could picture, if we were a group that was meeting many times over a series of times, maybe we would play that game and then break into breakout groups and do like an in-depth circle on one or two of those topics that were raised, to have more dialogue around some of these important restorative concepts. So the next thing we wanted to do was pause our activities for just a few minutes to give a little bit of a zoomed out picture of why we feel like it's important to teach restorative justice in this way. So, you know, the reason that Kathleen and I are, you know, really big fans of using games and activities and experiences to teach about restorative justice is because we see it as a way of teaching that's really deeply in alignment with restorative values. We see it as a restorative pedagogical approach. So we want to just take a moment to kind of step back and talk about that why. You know, it's not just because they're fun and keep things more lively and engaged. It also, we see it as important in kind of establishing that deeper alignment of teaching, bringing the work to communities in a way that is in alignment with the work. So we have a couple visuals that we're going to share to talk about that. And then we'll have a couple more activities to get into together. So just give me 1 second to start the screen share. All right, there we go. Okay. So when we have this conversation with groups, one of our favorite images to show is these two pictures right next to each other. And Kathleen, can you just give me a thumbs up that the screen share is working well? Perfect. Just want to double check before we dive in. So this is, of course, a pretty standard classroom configuration on the left and a pretty standard courtroom configuration on the right. And just using the chat for a moment, looking at these two images next to each other, what is the impact of these shared structures? So what impact does it then have on the people interacting together in that space? Get back to the chat here. So yes, similar setup, power difference. Mary, yes, I'm seeing the word power over, power difference. That's absolutely one of the first things that sticks out to me too, right? We have the podium and we have this kind of raised platform for a teacher and for a judge. These are definitely spaces that are prioritizing certain voices and giving more space and more perhaps worth to certain voices over others. It's directing intention. It's a little bit intimidating, I'm seeing. A sage on a stage, not recognizing the collective wisdom. Seeing a couple people noting that all of the chairs are faced, towards the front. And so there isn't that kind of like just spatial configuration invitation to interact with each other and to benefit from each other's wisdom. Seeing that control, that power, knowledge distribution. Yeah, so this form of education is oftentimes referred to as the transmission model. So it's like this idea of pouring knowledge into the empty vessel of the learner, where the teacher is up front and is the holder of all the wisdom, all the answers, and is just kind of dispersing that. One versus many voiceless. I'm seeing also, this noting that it looks like many church setups as well. This is kind of across the board, right? I mean, even thinking about faculty meetings that I'm on, faculty meetings are set up this way too. We use this structure in a lot of different spaces. And it has all of these drawbacks that we're noticing, right? We have this prioritization of one voice. It encourages a very passive role for students. So you're kind of just sitting back and receiving and not doing a lot of bringing your own wisdom and experience, not doing a lot of engaging with each other. And the drawback of that, of course, is that you're missing out. You're missing out on the wisdom and experience and everywhere that you can get when you really take time for deep and relational dialogue in a classroom space. And another thing we like to talk about is if we want to subvert the image on the right, if we want to subvert justice processes, we need to subvert the one on the left as well. We need to be really reimagining how we learn about restorative justice if we're also going to reimagine the justice system that we see as in need of transformation. And same goes for folks who work in schools or other community contexts as well. So just to give a little overview of a few of what we see as essential elements to this restorative pedagogical approach. So when we're teaching or training others about restorative justice. Back to my slides here. So first and foremost, restorative pedagogy builds relationships, which is why we have a lot of games and activities that are really focused on building relationships. And I hope you noticed how in that last this or that activity, it moves from these kind of easy relationship building icebreaker questions like burgers or tacos to ones that get to more of how we are as people. So that, is it easy for you to apologize or is it more difficult? And kind of getting to those layers and then into what we think about the world. So that kind of layered, really intentional trust building and relationship building is something that's really important. Encouraging respectful conversation about important issues. So maybe some of you have had this experience, like maybe in a college class or somewhere else where the instructor introduces a really heated topic, gives some overview, and then does so what do you think? Let's talk about it. But there's no kind of trust and relationship building to then provide a safe and respectful space for that dialogue to unfold. So being really intentional about talking about the important issues, talking about the things that really need to be addressed in our communities, but doing so in a way that's very intentional about building the type of community that can engage positively and respectfully in those conversations so that we're not just shutting each other down. We're actually seeing each other as full people as we discuss these important issues. Reframing the teacher as a facilitator. So thinking about creating space, how you set up the training or classroom, being open to ongoing learning alongside with the people who you're guiding through this experience, leaning really heavily on experiential learning techniques as a way to have people kind of live into this work a little bit more, and then creating that opportunity for equal voice. So you're hearing from a lot of people. So those are some of the kind of the main tenets of a restorative pedagogical approach. Pass to you, Kathleen.
Thanks so much, Lindsey. When we think about using that restorative pedagogical approach, one of the key elements that we focus on and encourage folks to consider when working with learners students, community members, however you relate to your community, one of the things we encourage people to think about is their own preparation as a facilitator, teacher, trainer, however you identify. That two pieces, the need to know yourself and the need to know your learners, is so critical and really can't be overlooked. You can kind of reference back to what Lindsey just said about bringing in a really important topic that could require some risk or vulnerability from your community to talk about. It's really critical that you as the facilitator have done your own self-reflection about your relationship to that topic before bringing it into the space. So that first piece, what do I bring to this content and how will I relate my views, my perspective or lived experience to the learners? Really taking time and intention to do that before initiating a topic like this, or exploring even some of those topics that we mentioned during this or that, could require some deeper reflection before digging in deeper. Next, authenticity and congruence. So really asking people to show up authentically requires that you as a facilitator also are prepared to do that. Bringing in a sense of trust in each other's lived experience, fostering a brave space. So there's some materials out in the world that we refer to that distinguish what a safe space is from a brave space, to hold difficult conversations where people are invited to be really honest, even though it may create tension. And we want to make sure that as facilitators, we're ready to hold the container for whatever may arise. And this involves having some self-regulation, some mindfulness. And so some of the practical tools we recommend are based around how can you do some contemplative work on your own before and after the class or the training. So we can't overstate the importance of self-evaluation and self-reflection. And one of the things Lindsey and I always do, we really benefit from training and teaching together. And so holding a debrief after every class or after every offering so that we can reflect things to each other and reflect on our own presence and get feedback and learn from each other's observations. So I want to just take a moment to invite you all to put in the chat and Lindsey could advance to the next slide. What's something that you do to prepare to, however you identify, it could be facilitate, teach, maybe lead. What do you do to kind of get yourself in that centered presence before you step into that kind of role? Okay, thank you, Joan. Breathe, yeah, heart reflection. Pray about the impacts, pray to the Holy Spirit, reflect, time alone in the Blessed Sacrament or a retreat. Meditate and something to eat, yes. Not having an empty stomach is so crucial. Practice the presence, pause, think, pray, and think of learners, breathe, beautiful. Probing myself. Yeah, these are wonderful. Centering meditation with co-facilitators. Check in to make sure partners are in a good place. Yeah, wonderful. A meaningful stone with me. Review the material again. Yeah, just being prepared with what am I bringing in? Talking with co-facilitators. Yeah, thank you to those who mentioned checking in with co-facilitators. You saw in that previous slide, we had something about authenticity and congruence. And one of the things that we find is so important is if I'm working with a group, talking about having respectful, honest, authentic relationships but I'm not in right relationship with my co-facilitator, that's going to come through and disrupt the learning and the experience of restorative and the restorative practices development if there's that sort of dissonance or incongruence. So living the principles before we're bringing them to others, before and after we're bringing them to others, is so essential to this. And it may take extra time, it may take extra attention, but it's so well worth it. Okay, Lindsey, could you advance? There we go. So the second piece that I mentioned for preparing to facilitate is the need to really know your learners or your community members. When we're preparing to do restorative justice work together, we realize that taking risks and making choices that's an alive element of a restorative justice process each step of the way, and that we will be stepping into the unknown. So thinking about what you're asking your learners to do and what do you know about them already, so that you can bolster this space, bolster the support that folks need in order to encourage them to both take risks that encourage them to explore the unknown, and also thinking about this, the window of tolerance, which is a resource from Dan Siegel. Where might the lines be? What do you need to look for to check in and see, is this pushing anybody in this space too far? Do we need to kind of back off and move slowly with the material so we can scaffold the learning experiences and keep people in connection with each other as we're exploring new skills, new ways of thinking about ourselves and others? And the last piece here is some material from Bell Hooks, where she writes about the importance of love, humor, and humility in the classroom. And I just said, yes, please, right? Like, what can we do to bring authenticity and not take ourselves too seriously in this context of taking risks? When we're playing these games, when we're doing experiential learning, the presence of humility and care and honest, love for the learning experience can go a really long way as you're inviting learners into this process of exploring themselves and exploring a restorative mindset together.
So we're going to move into our next activity in a moment here, but I just want to mention before we do, we wanted to briefly touch on some of that material, but the Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools, in addition to having game and activity instructions, also has a few introductory chapters on, the restorative pedagogical approach, restorative justice and experiential learning, and then a chapter on this kind of art of preparing to teach with some really good concrete tools on that, building your understanding of self, building your understanding of learners, and then has also some guidance on designing your own games and activities and how to design a whole learning experience or like a full day training really centered around this experiential learning approach. So just to say that that's a good resource for diving into some of this material and some of these considerations for, prior to bringing these specific games and activities into your learning communities. So this next activity that we wanted to do with you today is one, so we just did two, we talked about SIA, which is a great relationship building activity, and then we played this or that with a restorative twist, which is kind of part relationship building activity and part a great way to prompt reflection that then can lead to further dialogue on what a restorative approach looks like, some of these kind of key principles of restorative justice. This next activity is called What Did I Need? And it's an activity that is for introducing the restorative justice paradigm, for getting people to think about their needs and how a restorative response could be responsive to those needs. This is an activity that was developed specifically to be facilitated on Zoom. So you'll see it uses Zoom features like the chat. It was a 2020 creation, when all of a sudden we were shifting from doing almost everything in person to almost everything online, which was an intense time of learning and adapting, but actually resulted in a lot of really fun new material that's going to be part of a book that Kathleen and I are writing now that will come out next year, a little book of restorative teaching tools for online learning. So all games and activities specifically for playing over Zoom or other video chat platforms. So you're going to need your chat feature again for this activity. And I'm going to be guiding you through a few prompts that are going to ask you to reflect back on different times and experiences in your life. And what I'll ask you to do for each of those prompts is to share a few reflections in the chat. So first question for you. Think back on a time that you, as a member of some community that you're part of, so this could be your church community, this could be your neighborhood, times that you've maybe been part of a school or a workplace. Think about a time that as a member of a community, you became aware of a harm having been committed. Maybe this was a crime that took place. Maybe this was an incident of someone harming someone else on a more interpersonal level. You just became aware of this incident of significant harm within your community. Again, it could be neighborhood, church, whatever you feel drawn to, whatever comes to mind. Thinking back on that moment that as a community member, you became aware of that incident of harm, what did you need? And so in the chat, please share what were a few of your needs at that moment as a member of the community. Right away, I'm seeing safety, the opportunity to process it within the community, more information, someone to trust, to speak with, someone to listen deeply, a safe place to share, more information, to grieve, to talk about it, a desire to fix, to have solutions, to name and acknowledge the harm, to be heard and acknowledged, more perspective. I needed time to understand, confirmation that my perspective is genuine. I needed to know how to speak about the harm, connecting with other community members, the truth, to grieve, someone to vent to, an opportunity to speak while others listen deeply, needed everything to slow down, a process to reflect and heal, more information, time, trust, what I should do next, if anything, people in the community to believe the harm, a safe space to process before doing anything. Great. So I'm seeing a lot of commonality in these responses, right? A need for questions to be answered, a need for more information, a need for safety, a need for just a designated space for reflection, for coming together, for being believed. And I know I certainly, to know that something's going to happen, that there's going to be an outcome, that there's, that people are taking this seriously. And I certainly resonate with these needs as well, for when I've been a member of a community and something really hard has happened. Okay. So inviting reflections on our next question now. So this time, thinking back on a time that you have experienced significant harm. So maybe you were the victim of a crime. Maybe this was something more in your personal life, family, friendships, where you were a harmed party, where you experienced significant harm. What did you need in that moment? And sharing again in the chat. Many people to listen. And that listening was, I know, mentioned in the last response as well, that need for listening. Space and time to process, to be believed. Someone who really heard and understood. Community. Space to process without someone trying to fix me. I needed to be able to speak about it and not keep quiet. Listening without judgment. Time to feel all the feels without judgment. I love that. I always say that, feeling the feels. Share as a victim, to be understood and accepted. Seeing some dittos. There's some resonance. Express the unmanageable feelings. Great. I'll add, never saying it's not that bad, that validation, right, of the harm. fresh ideas. Absolutely. I know I've experienced a need for safety in this case as well, needing to know that it won't happen again, and that the person who caused the harm is taking it seriously. Not being rushed into action and planning to process the trauma and how to heal it. Great. Thank you for sharing those needs. And again, seeing a lot of common needs there, needs around that. Having a voice in the process, right? Being heard, having time and space to process, having that experience validated. Absolutely. Next question and final question that we'll ask you to respond to here. Thinking about a time that you caused significant harm. So maybe you committed a crime, or maybe this is a time that you harmed someone else in your life, where your actions caused harm to another person. What did you need in that moment? Courage to admit the harm. Absolutely. Forgiveness to listen to the one harmed, the opportunity to be heard. Deep self-reflection that's intentional to give me space to think it through, a chance to sit down with all parties to share a path to forgiveness, time to process and reflect, a place to share openly with the person I harmed, to know there might be redemption at some point, someone to talk to, for them to dialogue with me about it, a chance to correct the harm, courage to accept the reactions, seeing more sames, more dittos, time, opportunity to process and reflect, to understand what caused me to act that way. So that, that personal self-reflection as well. Was it intentional or accidental? Yeah. Some of these like specifics, right? To accept my responsibility to the one I harmed, space to take responsibility. Right. It's interesting to note just how many times the word space has appeared across all three responses, just wanting space, intentional space for some of this, accountability, speaking and listening, a time for self-reflection and time, space and time, a time for self-reflection, willingness to accept the truth, someone to listen to help me clarify what was going on with me. Absolutely. Yeah. Support, right? Someone who can like be there with you in that self-reflection process. I'll add one that's coming up for me that I don't think it's been named yet is I've definitely experienced the need to be seen as more than just this one incident. There's more to me as a person than the actions in this one situation. So balancing that accountability while also being seen as a full person. Great. So thank you so much for sharing those reflections. And again, lots of dittos, lots of resonance, relationship, that need for community, for connection. So I think this activity actually never fails to fascinate me because we've done it with a lot of different groups at this point, and the commonality in these human needs across groups is just striking. So I want to just invite a couple people to unmute for a change of pace and just share what insight did you gain from reflecting on your own needs and from hearing from the needs of others in these moments following harm. And echoing Kathleen, thank you everyone for the beautiful sharing. So if just a couple people would like to unmute to share their insights from going through this process together. What did it bring up for you? And especially related to your understanding of restorative justice. And Betsy.
I'll jump in. It is striking to me to notice that the needs of the person in the community, the person who experienced the harm and the person who caused the harm, are almost the same, right? Like everyone needs time everyone needs space, everyone needs an opportunity to be seen as a whole person. And oftentimes one of the arguments about why this doesn't work is that it takes too long. But oh look, everyone needs the same things when these inevitable conflicts and harms happen.
Yeah. Thanks for that reflection, Betsy. Absolutely. Yeah, it is interesting how much of the exact same language is used across all three roles, and that need for time and space. Yeah, James.
This would be me talking to a junior high group of integrated group that has problems, and I would wonder where I'm putting my foot in my mouth, basically. I don't feel adequate to address some of these issues in such a challenging group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for that reflection, James. I wonder, would you be okay if we save that kind of bigger discussion of like working with maybe more complicated groups for our final 15 minutes question
Absolutely.
time? And we could, because I think that's a
Absolutely.
really important question to raise. Thanks for that. Very important work. Does any other one person want to, I see, Chris, I see your hand. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I noticed not all of them equally, but how many needs were like came forward, and how it was hard to unpack the needs I experienced, but watching the other people say their needs helped me get clarity on, oh yeah, that too and that too. And then I could have, yeah, because it was a lot for just, a 15-second response window. So the group process, interestingly enough, with Zoom was supportive, I experienced.
Thanks for that reflection, Chris. I totally feel that same way. Like as I'm seeing the responses coming in, it's like, oh, I feel that too. Like that's definitely, I hadn't put words to it, but that's what I felt in that moment. And yeah, we've been thinking about ways to replicate this activity in person, and it is a case of I have a friend who calls this the chatterfall, like a waterfall, but it's chat. So the chatterfall works well for getting in 15 seconds, that feeling of resonance with each other. Francis?
Yeah, I noticed the word process came up in all of it, that all this involves process. And something else I'm not sure was posted that I kept thinking about was trust the process.
Mm.
And it goes to what was just said. It's not one thing, it's the process itself that heals and brings up what we need to be able to trust that process.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a great segue, right, for then talking about what a restorative process is like, and yeah, trusting that process, giving that time and space for some of these needs to be met. Let's hear one more reflection from Michelle. I see your hand.
Sorry, thanks. In addition to time and space and process, I noticed the presence of relationality, that in spite of the fact that most of us would like to solve these inside of our own heads, it's not possible, that you have to be in relationship with others in order for you to experience what you have to experience and to process what has to be, what comes after.
Absolutely. Yeah, that thank you so much for that reflection, Michelle. I think this is another activity that's a good jumping off point, right, for deeper dialogue. And one of those points of dialogue, just talking about how our more conventional criminal legal responses really intentionally pull people apart from each other, and advise people to not talk, to sever ties, or pull someone out of community. And so finding ways that meet that common need for connection, and just raising up how restorative justice in some of its earliest forms was really around finding ways that better respond to these common human needs, that bring people together, that allow space, that allow time, that allow process to unfold. So it's a good, I think, kind of grounding point to then have that discussion, and even that point of comparison of what we're trying to do in restorative justice. And Chris, thank you for this suggestion around using word cloud to do it in person. I love that. It's great. So we'll have to experiment with that. So thanks so much for those reflections on what did I need, and for your beautiful sharing. Kathleen, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody, for participating and reflecting on your own experiences in those 3 roles. I think one of the things that also reinforces that activity is that we all have been in all 3 of those roles. We've been in communities that have experienced harm. We've all been harmed, and we've all caused harm at some time. So just as folks working in restorative justice spaces, it helps build empathy, honesty, and really feeling into the experience that we're asking others to step into when we're facilitating a restorative justice model. The next activity revolves around a conceptual framework that many of you may have seen it has been called the social discipline window. Some folks call it social relational window, which is the title that Lindsey and I utilize. But this is adapted from the original that was developed by IIRP, Paul McCold and Ted Wachtel. Could I just see a show of physical hands? How many folks have seen this social relational window? A few people. I'm having trouble seeing everybody. Okay, it's new. Okay, a few more. Great. Okay, wonderful. So this is, again, a framework that gets used a lot to help learn and explore what restorative practices and restorative justice are all about. And so I'm going to talk through this framework and then describe how we like to engage with it in a more experiential way through one of our activities. We're not going to play the actual activity itself because it takes a lot of setup online. It is one of our activities that's more easily facilitated in person, but it's such a strong and effective activity that we wanted to include it in our presentation with you all today. So when you look at this model and you're looking at the Y, the vertical axis, you're seeing expectations for behavior going from low to high. And then looking at the X-axis, you're looking at support going from low to high. And then you see these 4 quadrants within those axes. So what we're looking at in the blue square, if you're imagining, interacting, one way that's kind of straightforward to think about this is how you might interact with a child in your life. If you are interacting with them with really high expectations and low support, it might come across as doing something to somebody else, being punitive. So one of the examples we can use would just be someone that you share space with, right? Like, let's say you are sharing an office space with someone where you have a shared kitchen. And there aren't shared agreements about how to keep the kitchen clean. And somebody in the office is leaving the kitchen messier than you would like. If you are in this 2-box, high expectations with low support, you may just create a sanction, like this person isn't allowed to use the kitchen any longer. All right, doing something to them without understanding what is going on and what support they might need. Or what even knowledge it might be required to understand that something's off in your arrangement, how you're in the shared space together. If you move to the green box and you're in that 4 space, that looks like having high support with low expectations. So in the same example of a messy shared kitchen, that might look like, you know what? The kitchen is messy all the time. I'm just going to keep cleaning it up. I'm not going to address the problem. I'm not going to talk to anybody about my expectations or co-creating new agreements. I'll just keep cleaning, which is a permissive response, right? It leads to being permissive of the behavior. When we look at that cream box that says not, Not having expectations nor having support is a neglectful response, right? So that would look like essentially not doing anything, just letting it let the kitchen be how it is, not talk to anybody about it. And that ends up being a neglectful, not taking any action at all. So of course, what we're working towards is the fourth quadrant, the with response, which matches high expectations with high levels of support. And that would be a restorative response. So in this kitchen example, that might look like having a conversation with the people that are sharing the kitchen and asking, you know, let's figure out what each of our needs and expectations are, how we can support each other to fulfill those needs and expectations, and what are the systems we need in place so that we can put action behind our agreements. So this is a model, like I said, that often gets brought up and talked through. And Lindsey and I decided to develop an activity that we call the social relational window shuffle, where we would have one scenario that we would share with a whole group. And then in small groups, so dividing, let's say you have a group of 12 people, putting them in groups of 3. And each small group of 3 is secretly given one of those quadrants. So maybe Lindsey, Caitlin, and I are in one group, and the facilitator would say, okay, you all are the 2 box. You're the punitive response. We as a team would think about the scenario and we would create our 2 response. Meanwhile, the other 3 teams are working on the for, the not, and the with response. Once we've developed our responses, we would act it out. So the 3 of us would act out our response without telling people which quadrant we are. We would just demonstrate it and then ask everyone else, which quadrant do you think that was? And what you're seeing here is everybody else participating would step into the social relational window that's been drawn or taped onto the floor and take a guess at which quadrant we were just demonstrating. And what's really interesting is you won't always get people guessing the quadrant that you were modeling, because people will see different things. And it is, again, it's a quick snapshot. This isn't like a 1-hour discourse on what a 2 response would be. So it generates an opportunity to talk through, you know, what was permissive in that, or what did make that response restorative? And then building from that, a lot of conversation and dialogue around, oh yeah, when I think of myself in different contexts, in different relationships, sometimes I tend to be more permissive. That's kind of the quadrant that I float into, especially when I was managing employees. But then I can think of different roles that I've been in where maybe I've drifted into a more of a punitive 2 response. And so in the debrief of this activity, we can think through our own responses and also how I've been affected. Like when I had teachers that were more permissive versus more restorative, how did that impact me as a student? Or similarly, when I had managers or other folks in my life who were interacting with me in these different ways, what were the impacts? So this is also, I'll just mention, because I mentioned humor and humility previously, there's a lot of liveliness that comes through this game. There can be a lot of humor because people are being asked to act. Some people get really into it and really go to town with their performance. And it helps bring the group closer together as they're witnessing each other in these demonstrations and learning more about how each person relates to these processes and these values of support and accountability.
Great. So I want to just mention again that written instructions for all of these activities are coming your way. So if that felt like a lot to absorb, never fear. There's a nice PDF that gives you a step-by-step guide to how to run that activity. And then we're always, of course, available for questions that might come up. Would love to continue to be in touch. So I'm just going to quickly kind of recap what we've gone through, and then we want to shift to have plenty of time for questions and dialogue. So we will be sharing with you after this session instructions for SIA, the first relationship building question activity that we talked about that's for in-person, the this or that with a restorative twist, the what did I need, which is that introducing the restorative paradigm over Zoom, and then this social relational window shuffle, which is for introducing the restorative paradigm, can be done both in person and online. I will say, though, it's one that I think is maybe extra fun in person. And we also, in thinking about what we wanted to share with you all today, there's another activity called Curiosity Did Not Harm the Cat. That is an activity for practicing skillful question asking, like it's an essential skill for restorative justice facilitation. So thinking about open-ended questions, and then practicing skills like open-ended affective questions that dig into kind of the emotional impact of an incident or an experience, reflective statements. And so all of those skills are able to be practiced through this Curiosity Did Not Harm the Cat activity. When we saw how many people were signing up for this session, we realized that it wouldn't be possible to actually play it together, because it's one that you play in circles, so you kind of need a circle size. But we still want to share it, and so we will share a PDF with instructions for that one that's pretty easy to follow along. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out. But it's another fun one and gets into kind of another category of our games and activities, which is games and activities for skills development. So helping people who are learning to facilitate to practice essential skills. So I think we are ready to move into questions, unless I'm missing anything, Kathleen. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we were hoping we might do another chatterfall of questions. And if you could write your questions into the chat first, so we could see if there's some commonalities and group some questions together. I noted Jane's question about, taking the risk with some of these activities, working with more challenging groups. And also John had a follow-up question about Dan Siegel's window of tolerance. What other questions do you have? If you'd be willing to write them in the chat, then hopefully we can cover as much ground as possible at the time that we have left.
I missed the question about window of tolerance, but should we start? Kathleen, do you want to start on that one while folks are?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so the window of tolerance is another conceptual framework by Dan Siegel, and I can put his name in here just in case you missed it. And it has to do with how each person has their own capacity for managing emotional intensity and neuroregulation related to that emotional intensity. So there's like a window of tolerance right here in the middle, and people can be overstimulated, go into like hyper arousal, or they can go into hypo arousal shutdown mode. And you've probably seen this in any group that you've been, when people get pushed beyond that window, their capacity to manage emotional intensity that they're feeling in their body, they can go into that hyper or hypo state. And in those states, additional learning, integrating, and relating is no longer possible. And so Dan Siegel really promotes understanding, looking for the signs in others of when they might be moving out of their window of tolerance, and being very intentional to try to facilitate and guide folks staying within that window in order to optimize learning and connection, which we find to be so important in a relational learning environment.
Great. I'm seeing some great questions popping up in the chat here. And I'm wondering if I'm seeing a theme emerging around this, like when there's conflict or tension, or when as a facilitator you might feel like under-equipped, even to hit on something James was talking about earlier. So I wonder if we could talk about that for a little bit and then move through some of these other questions. And so, one thing that's coming up for me to just kind of start this conversation is, particularly with groups that are meeting multiple times over a period of time, being really intentional about a slow build of trust, and a slow build of inviting additional vulnerability and diving into more difficult topics can be really helpful. So you're kind of like slowly wading in. So I have the privilege of getting to teach classes over the course of a semester, right? And so when I'm planning out my whole semester, I'm able to think about, like, this week we're going to do this to like build our foundation really strong, and we're going to just put one toe into this conversation that is going to be inviting a little bit more vulnerability and trust, and then we'll keep building on that trust and that relationship next time so that we can go a little further into something that's a little bit more difficult. And it just kind of it's able to create this sense over time of like really building a learning community that cares for each other and leans on each other, that can then engage with more difficult topics that even I as facilitator don't know all the answers to. And so just remembering to not skip over that relationship building and trust building. And that of course has to be done in more abbreviated ways if it's a shorter period of time, or maybe you won't get quite as deep as you wanted if you need to just spend more time up front. But what's coming up for you, Kathleen?
Yeah, agreed on what you shared, Lindsey. I was thinking something that was just written, if you can include, so we often think about, the sort of conventional way of teaching or training as, it's my responsibility to guide the group of learners that I'm working with. But if you have an opportunity to build relationships with those learners and invite them into a co-training or co-facilitation role with you, where they could be like peer facilitators. So thinking about if you're working with teens who have been involved in the justice system and have experiences and backgrounds that are very different from your own potentially, are there individuals in that group that you could work with and ask them to step into a role of co-facilitator with you and do work separately with them to prepare them for what that means? If you're doing any sort of connection circle, relationship building circle, this is a great place to start by asking young people and participants to move into a leadership role in a very structured way that involves leading that circle and gaining experience and really trying to distribute, right? Like changing the power differential, changing the hierarchy, and really putting action behind that idea that each of us is really the expert of our own lives, and elevating that wisdom. Another piece that I'd recommend when there's some unpredictability, or you aren't sure, let's say, about the maturity level of the group to interact in these challenging topics or triggering topics, is to be really clear upfront about agreements for the space, whether you call those norms or ground rules or values. Co-creating with the group, asking them what they think is necessary in order to embark in these sensitive areas, and having those written in a place where everybody can see them, so that they really have a presence and have some traction and buy-in and can be referenced back to. And then, just like Lindsey said, I think just taking bite-sized steps. Really having a scaffolded approach to lead into bigger topics, starting with a lot of groundwork around getting to know each other before taking that leap. Lindsay, do you see another question to go to next?
Yeah, well, one other theme that's kind of sticking out to me is how to use these games and activities for communities that are brand new to restorative justice, and a related question around like how to make it more foundational so that it's like just becomes a part of the fabric of the way of doing things, like in a parish, for example, or in a committee. And yeah, just having it be kind of more foundational, like a new, like as opposed to the usual way of doing things. And those feel related to me because I think how I would answer the first one is related to the second one of finding ways to have this just be fully woven in to the way a group, whether that's a learning group or a committee group, is being together. I think it's interesting, like, so for someone who's never heard about restorative justice before, never experienced any of these processes before, if you kind of step back and pay attention for a moment to how rarely people or groups are actually making time and space for genuine relationship building or deeper dialogue, or setting up spaces in a way that invites more voices to participate, it's kind of striking. You know, I was at a parent meeting at my kid's school the other day, and it felt like such a natural moment to do a circle round, right, where we could have a moment to just connect and build trust, and it didn't happen. You know, there wasn't that invitation. And so I think one way to weave this into the fabric of communities that's also a great way to just introduce people who are not at all familiar is to just carve out the time and space for more genuine relationship building and trust building. And then that gets people's attention, right? It feels different from most of what most of us are experiencing in a lot of different contexts in our life. And people start to have this kind of like, what was that feeling? I liked that. I would like to feel that again. And, you know, that then you can turn that into the like, what is restorative justice question really easily, right? Because restorative justice is about prioritizing relationships, about carving out that time and space for people to be together and communicate together in these more genuine ways. What would you add, Kathleen?
Thanks. Yeah. Just in terms of the questions about, you know, could this be foundational to all parish work or other applications? 100% yes. So I do a lot of work with community groups and workplaces, and I just don't talk about crime. I talk about conflict and incidents of harm in interpersonal relationships, and the importance of doing as much proactive relationship building that as we can, so that we're prepared to step into difficult conversations, because we know that conflict is going to happen, misunderstanding is going to happen. And I'm sure many of your communities, you are exploring what it means to try to be more inclusive, to be more equitable, to invite in folks from very diverse backgrounds into your communities, which inherently means there's going to be more misunderstanding and likely more mistakes made that cause harm, and more opportunity to look at what does it really mean to put compassion in action. And so I use a lot of these activities in those contexts where I'm just not really using justice or crime, and instead talking about all of those different things that I said: misunderstanding, mistakes, conflict, harm. And then I also wanted to touch on a really big question that Chris put in the chat, one of the first ones, where Chris mentioned, I just lost it, but basically like when something, attention in the training space comes back to being, it turns into conflict or tension towards the facilitators, which is so, if you haven't been in that situation yet, I would guess that it means you haven't been stepping into sort of social risk or vulnerability with learners, because it happens really easily and really naturally. And so I'd say one, again, the preparation to facilitate is so important. Thinking about, you know, what's going to come up for me and what ways might I react? Am I someone who might tend to get defensive? Am I someone who might start shutting down when I'm in that tension? And thinking about what you can do to be ready. Preparing also with a co-facilitator is really important. You know, if you see me, if Lindsey and I are going into a hard space, letting her know if you see me in any of these sort of expressions or affects, you can know that that could mean I'm starting to shut down and I would like you to help step in. And then I would say the honesty, the real honesty about our imperfection as humans and our own. If I'm a facilitator, I only have so much capacity to manage something in the moment, and being authentic about what I need and my responsibility. And if it's not something I can hold in the moment, especially in a group setting, being really clear and explicit about what other moment is going to be made available to continue that hard conversation. And maybe a facilitator is needed, right? Maybe I need outside support to really work through something. And then the follow through with that offer is essential. You know, we've all probably been in spaces where someone said, like, we'll deal with that later, and then don't have the opportunity to come back to. So really demonstrating lived active accountability and following through, even if it's uncomfortable. Thank you for all those great questions. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Caitlin.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much for all of these questions, for all of this community experience we've shared in, and Kathleen and Lindsey for shepherding us through it, sharing your wisdom. I think, you know, a reflection that I was having is knowing how many folks in this community are asking these questions of, like, how do we introduce these concepts? And I know part of the reason I really appreciate your tools is because for some folks, bringing their community, their ministry group together in circle is like a no-brainer of, like, yeah, let's do that. For others, you know, stepping into circle feels like a really high bar. And so these activities are, as we saw, they can be so short, they can be so engaging in a way that, you know, maybe we name restorative justice up front, but maybe we don't. And we can, you know, start off with one of these activities and then allow that to open up the conversation, you know, the way that you've modeled for us today. So thank you for just helping to expand our toolbox and sharing these resources with us. Speaking of resources and other ways to stay connected, I'll just transition us out with a few links, a few announcements. I'm putting in the chat here a bunch of links, but they will also go out in a follow-up email. So here again is the little book of restorative teaching tools and the restorative teaching tools website. These will be complemented with the specific PDFs that Kathleen and Lindsey are sending on these activities we did today. I saw already someone put their information in the chat. If there's someone in particular you'd like to stay connected with, or offer your contact information to stay connected with others, please feel free to do so in these last few minutes. In general, for us to stay connected as a community, want to invite you, if you are not already, to be a part of our community of practice. We host monthly events and have a listserv that we send out a resource roundup with more materials and opportunities to kind of facilitate our learning and practice. So you can sign up on that page I just dropped in. Our next community of practice event will be a deepening circle, and these are evening events where we focus on a particular theme or challenge or question that we may encounter in our practice, and then move into small group circles to reflect together on that theme or challenge or question. So our next one is going to be on November 15th, and you can sign up at this link that I'm putting in. And then in addition, if you're just looking to kind of connect more generally, hear about other folks' ministries, we also host community hours and announce those events on that listserv as well. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't just mention that it's because of the support and generosity of folks like you that we're able to offer these sessions at no charge. And so if you enjoyed this Skillcraft session and you feel so moved as to make a donation to Catholic Mobilizing Network, you can do so at this link here. And I think that's all I have by way of closing announcements. I know folks are probably moving on to their next thing at this half hour now. But we'll just check in with Kathleen and Lindsey to see if is there anything else closing on your end before we offer a gesture of gratitude.
Just a big thank you. Really appreciate the time with you all and all the great engagement and questions, and feel free to be in touch. We'd love to continue to be in community with you all.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
We're so grateful. And maybe as we sign off, if folks are up for turning their video on and or leave it off and just offer a gesture or word of thanks and farewell to the group and to Kathleen and Lindsey in particular. So whatever that gesture may be for you, or feel free to drop in the chat. I see hearts and applause. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kathleen and Lindsey. Thank you so much to all of you. I hope you have a great rest of your day and evening and weekend. Blessings.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.